I'll let Brent take over and tell you all about what he has.
Thanks, Leah. Thank you so much, Leah. Appreciate this wonderful museum, too. It's great to be here, and I'm glad you could join us tonight. We've done one of these each month now since January, and it's been on a subject that I've been able to pick, so it's been kind of fun. And we're on one of my favorite ones tonight. There's no way we can cover Porter's life, but we'll hit some of the highlights, and if there are people here that would like to add, we've got royalty here in Rockwell's family, so. And John, what's your direct relation?
Great-great-grandson.
Great-great-grandson, so that's pretty important. Any other relatives of Porter here tonight? Yeah, could you tell us?
Like fifth great-grandson.
Good.
We come from the Mabel Jones Rockwell.
Oh, good. Well, if you have stories or tales you'd like to tell, we'll turn it over to you to add some things, okay? We'll just hit some. I mostly am guided by the things I've collected, okay? So that's the whole idea here is insights from artifacts. So we hope we tell a couple of stories about the artifacts that you may not know. It's been a lot of fun over the years to collect. I've been a collector now for 68 years, and I blame my grandmother, who I don't remember, for this hobby because she died when I was only a year old. My biography has a picture of her holding me. But at any rate, she was a pack rat. And my wife says there's only room in a family for one collector. And I think she'd like to revise that now that we have over 1 million items, that one may be too many. But there are a lot of subjects that we collect. We've hit a lot of different subjects this year, starting with Butch Cassidy and so on, and going on the way down. We'll hit Brigham Young and coming to Mormons a little bit next time with artifacts. And I hope you'll take the time to come look at some of these artifacts. I'd like to share a few of them with you. First of all, we're going to talk about Old Port tonight, and any of you that are related to him know more probably than I do. So just jump in, okay? Because I'll be all ears like Ross Perot. I love reading about Port. In fact, the first time I remember having a direct connection with him and collecting was when I got a call back in 1966 from Chad Flake. I don't know if you know Chad, but he was the head of special collections at Brigham Young University back in the 60s and before. He'd sung in my mother's choir for a while, so Chad knew me and he knew I was interested in old stuff. And like my grandmother, I have been wanting to collect things for my whole life. In fact, the first thing I remember about collecting was a bonfire that was set behind. Looked like a bonfire to me. It's probably a small one. I was only 7, but it was behind my grandfather's home in downtown Provo. Any of you that know where Brick Oven Restaurant is, it would be the west parking lot now. There's a couple old trees out front that my grandfather and I planted. They were little sticks back in 1956 when he had his fatal heart attack. He lived for 6 years beyond my grandmother, but I remember him saying he sure wished he could pull his car in the garage. The garage was in back. The house was later moved. The garage was all full of her things, and he didn't have the heart to go through her stuff and throw things out. The kids had no problem with that, which frightens me to death, frankly. But they took everything out back and built a fire and started throwing everything in. And I remember my uncle's only 7, but I remember distinctly a couple of things from that day. One is I remember my uncle's going in and just dumping the things from the boxes into this fire without even looking. Nobody's even looking at it. I don't know what went up. And then I remember my grandfather's false teeth in the ashes, and that's a weird thing to remember. And they dumped those out. Then I remember 2 uncles fighting over a pair of socks. And that's all I remember from that day, really. It was a beautiful day, but other than that, I thought it was crazy. I asked my mother, since we moved upstairs after Pop, my grandfather died. My father was an architect and was designing a home on the East Bench up above where the Provo Temple was just torn down. And anyway, I I asked her if she'd saved any of grandmother's things. She says, yeah, there was one box. It was up in the rafters of the garage, and I had your dad go get it before we moved. Well, emboldened by the age of 12, I pushed her to find the box, and it was out in our new garage, and she finally found it, and she says, you can just have it. We've never been through it. It's probably just junk. Well, in that box were 12 letters of Heber J. Grant written to my grandmother between 1931 and 33, the Great Depression, while they were trying to keep a boy on a mission to Texas at the time. And there was one statement which he used as his moral guide, that which we persist in doing becomes easy to do. Not that the nature of the thing has changed, but that our power to do has increased. He borrowed it from Emerson, but that became his guiding thing. It was printed up with his beautiful signature. You know how he practiced his signature. And I have that at my shop, so if anybody wants to come to my little law office, I'm an attorney, but my office is kind of a museum. So we had some youth the other night, which was fun. We have youth groups. It's not very big. In fact, this is monstrous by comparison here, but it's jammed with some of the treasures that we have, including Butch's .38 caliber revolver and the flight jacket for Amelia Earhart and her goggles, and some other things in there that are kind of unique. So we'd love to have you come by if you want. Any rate, we're going to talk about old Port, and I remember when Chad Flake called me in the 60s. He said he just got a collection in of Parley P. Pratt material. It had been donated to the Y. The Pratt family had generously given it to them. And he said, there's one item in here I think you'd be really interested in. It has to do with Porter Rockwell. Well, I knew who Porter Rockwell was at this time. I was 17, but I knew who he was. And I'd read about him, everything I could at the time. I knew that he was quite controversial. Some people said he was the one that shot Boggs, and many others said he didn't. I tend to believe Port because he said if he had, he'd be gone. You know? And plus I'm an attorney, and after Porter Rockwell was held in for almost 10 months in Missouri jail, they had no evidence. They never brought charges against him for shooting at Boggs. They only brought charges for him for breaking jail, which he did shortly, and they sentenced him to 5 minutes in jail. And I had that original document sentencing him to 5 minutes in jail. I hate to say I don't have it anymore, but I traded it to a guy by the name of Mark Hoffman. And I don't know what he did with it, but it was a genuine document. It was sad to lose it that way. I lost a lot of stuff that way, unfortunately, but learned a lot. Well, Porter Rockwell was a scout, pioneer, frontiersman, adventurer, hardy, and became fearless. He was a deputy marshal here in Utah. He was a protector of both Joseph Smith as a policeman in Nauvoo and as his right-hand guard, and Brigham Young out here in Utah. Old-timers in Utah always said Porter got his man. One of the interesting things I think that's been said about Porter that I liked, I'm going to quote from an article that was done by Danielle Wagner back in 2017, but his lethal accuracy with a shotgun and policy of, quote, always shoot first, that way they know you're armed, is a pretty good quote. I like that. It seems to stand for a lot. Despite his rough and tumble attitude, Porter Rockwell remained unshakably faithful to the church and its leaders until his death in June 1878 at the Colorado Stables in Salt Lake, where the old, what was that theater? There was an old theater there at one time after Colorado Stables years ago. He served as a bodyguard, of course, to Joseph Brigham. He's known as the Destroying Angel. And he was one of the original Danites. Incidentally, one of the fun pieces that's up here is this Lion Store account ledger. This is from Far West. Now, there's nothing from Far West except stuff written later, almost. So this is one of the rare pieces from Far West. before the Saints were hightailed it out of there. And it's a ledger of a store, church store in Far West where almost everybody went in. I mean, you can find Brigham's name, you can find Sidney Rigdon here. I'm looking at one, Samson Avar. Do you remember him? He was the founder of the Danites, or the first one. Later excommunicated, but he was a right-hand man that before some of the others that joined later on. Joseph Smith Jr. Was buying for his wife here the goods this day, 2 3/4 yards of Irish linen. So we know what the prophet bought that day. There's another day in here where Joseph Smith bought 10 pounds of sugar. And his father, Joseph Smith Sr., is listed. David W. Patton was shot during this time, but he went into the store and bought some things. There were some interesting entries along here. Some were buying books, but mostly they were buying just food and supplies. But you name them, almost everybody's in here. In fact, of all of the things I've collected over the years, this is the only one that mentions Alpheus Gifford. How many of you know who Alpheus is? Anybody? Do you know who Eliezer Miller is? Well, those are two Latter-day Saints that you're going to learn about tonight, because Eliezer Miller, they were both friends of Porter's, and the prophet. Eliezer Miller and Alpheus Gifford went out as missionaries in 1831, about the same time as Samuel Smith went out. But they went up to the Mendon area in New York, and the early stomping grounds of the Saints. And they were out for about 7 months, and we know they only had 2 convert baptisms, these two. And we're told that they came home rather discouraged, like some missionaries are, after the 7-month period. They started out as a 5-some, but they ended up as a 2-some. And Eliezer and Alpheus, they only had 1 baptism apiece, but it turned out pretty good when Eliezer had baptized Brigham Young, and Alpheus baptized his friend Heber C. Kimball. Now, we wouldn't have known about that. That's my great-great-grandfather. We wouldn't have known about that because neither man could write. And if you can't write, you're forgotten many times. But the converts could write, and so they wrote down who it was that had converted them, the Mennonite, or the conference they were at the time, Methodist conference. Anyway, Porter knew these people. They were early Latter-day Saints, and that's always been good to me. Incidentally, I've only seen, his name appears in this journal, Alpheus Gifford, but I've only seen a couple of documents signed with his ex. He couldn't write, and they all came in this Parley P. Pratt collection I was telling you about. I tried very, very hard to trade BYU out of one, but they wouldn't do it. But they at least gave me a copy of a couple of them, so that was good. Well, Porter has said, killed more outlaws than Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, Tom Horn, and Bat Masterson combined. Now, we talked about these guys last month, so it's kind of a fitting walk-in on him. His Hawkeye vision was so acute he could spot landmarks along the trail days before his fellow pioneers. His accuracy was so deadly, he once shot a bank robber attempting to escape on horseback in the pitch black of night. It didn't take long for Rockwell's legendary abilities to draw attention. In fact, it was said in early Utah that travelers came here basically to see 2 things early on. They wanted to see this egg-like building out in the middle of nowhere, the Tabernacle, and they wanted to get a look on Porter Rockwell. In fact, we know that around the fire, this is a little ditty that was quite famous back in his day. Have you heard of Porter Rockwell? He's the Mormon triggerite. They say he hunts for horse thieves when the moon is shining bright. So if you rustle cattle, I'll tell you what to do. Get the drop on Porter Rockwell, or he'll get the drop on you. They say that Porter Rockwell is a scout for Brigham Young. He's hunting up the unsuspects that haven't yet been hung. So if you steal a Mormon girl, I'll tell you what to do. Get the drop on Porter Rockwell, or he'll get the drop on you. Well, like I say, he was famous, and I've always thought it was interesting that with Porter and the few like him we had out here, Hanks, and I brought a couple of documents of Bill Hickman here. In fact, one of these is kind of interesting. Bill Hickman was a murderer, no question about it. But he's one of the Danites, one of the supporters for many years before he was finally axed over killing. But this is a promissory note from Great Salt Lake City, GSL City, August 14th, 1851. And it's a promissory note signed by Isaac B. Hatch and William Hickman. The fun thing about this is I later learned that Isaac Hatch was shot dead by Hickman later. So be careful who you sign a promissory note with. Okay, might not work out too good. But that's the way it was. Rockwell was an exceedingly unusual person. His life and character seem summarized in the following letter to the prophet Joseph Smith, written by S. Armstrong in Philadelphia at the time Rockwell was in hiding for the arrest warrant that went out on the attempted assassination or attempted murder of Boggs. Incidentally, can you see that signature there? Can you read Lilburn W. Boggs? It's pretty good size, isn't it? I think it shows a little of his ego, too. And some people are right huge. I have a George A. Custer letter. He didn't write big, but it was written from Monroe, Michigan when he was a young man, 1856, and the whole last page is his signature over and over and over and over again. So again, egos can sometimes show on characters long before they had. But this is the letter that was written for him in Philadelphia when he was in hiding by this S. Armstrong. Dear Brother Joseph, I'm requesting by our friend Orrin Porter Rockwell to drop a few lines informing you that he is in this place. His health is good, but his spirits are depressed, caused by his being unable to find employment of any kind. He has applied in different parts of the city and county, but all without success. Farmers can get persons to work from sunrise till dark merely for what they can eat. He is anxious to hear from you and wishes you could to see his mother and children and write all particulars. And I don't know if his wife was gone by this time. He lost a couple of wives.
They were separated and then divorced.
And separated and divorced. At any rate, how matters and things are and what the prospects are. I pity him from the bottom of my heart. His lot in life seems marked with sorrow, bitterness, and care. He is a noble and generous friend, but you know his worth. Any comments from me would be superfluous. He will wait in this place until he hears from you. Please write immediately, as it will be a source of comfort to him. At any rate, it'll be recalled that he got a little nervous about things in Nauvoo. There were these arrest warrants that were out, and Joseph stayed pretty much in the Nauvoo area. Porter went back east, but I guess he didn't want to stay too long, and he came back and unfortunately got recognized in St. Louis, and it was at that time that they sent him to, ended up in Liberty Jail. And it was a 9-month period during that time that he learned how to fish from the window of the jail bars using a pin and some string. I guess he was asked if he caught anything, and he says, "No, but I've had some nibbles." And so it must have been very discouraging for him during that time of incarceration. It was a serious thing, and he was treated very badly by the Missourians. I think it's a wonder that he survived myself. That must have been a terrible ordeal. At any rate, these are a few things that were said about Porter I wanted to share. Richard Burton, famous traveler, in his book, The City of the Saints, described Porter as tall and strong, wearing leather leggings and huge spurs. 2 revolvers were peeping from his blouse. His forehead was already a little bald by the time he was 49. He wore his long, grizzly locks, after the early fashion of the United States, gathered at the back of the neck. His brow, in contrast to his cool, determined eyes and jolly face, was puckered with frowning wrinkles. He possessed a laughing good humor and the manner of a jovial, happy, reckless, devil-may-care English ruffian. Now, this is Burton's description. Said the army officers called him Port and preferred him to the villains who would drink with a man and then murder him. A neighboring rancher to Rockwell in Skull Valley stated that this noted scout was a hardy, natural-born manhunter, that he was superstitious, silent, and morose. His every faculty suited him to be in the dangerous game of running down criminals. In 1870, Fitz Ludlow wrote that Porter was of middle height, very strongly made. He had broad shoulders with a chest round as a barrel. His hands looked powerful as a grizzly bear's. He had a massive face with an expression of fearlessness and ferocity, a heavy lower jaw, firm mouth, and good-humored but steady, searching eyes of steel gray blue. Was that what they were? They were steel gray. Okay. In 1861, Remy and Brenchley, the travelers, praised him as a man with little education and of ordinary intelligence, amiable, polite, with exceedingly distinguished and graceful manners. He possessed an imposing look with a dash of the aristocratic in it. Caroline Slack of Tokerville, that's where my wife's family settled, stated she remembered Porter. She stated that he generally traveled around with Brigham Young. He was not a very large man. In fact, Porter was rather small, she said. James Jennings of Rockville, Utah, had seen Porter many times, said that he was a husky man, cheerful and liked by all. And George Washington Bean, who worked with him many times, Indian interpreter and scout, close associate of Porter for several years, stated that Rockwell was a natural foxhound with an uncanny scent for criminals, a diamond in the rough, and it was great to know the man's inner self, his honesty and loyalty to church, country, and friends. Bean said Porter was above average height, so they disagree, some of the descriptions. That happens. Quick in movement with strong arms and chest. His eyes were gray, cool, and always searching, and his mouth was very expressive of his mood. Whatever Porter's exact appearance might have been, and I'm using as my text on this one, Nicholas Van Alphen's Porter Rockwell, which I thought was well written but short. His fitness for the task of a frontier marshal was proverbial and undisputed. He was very generous, had a strong attachment for children. He was steadfastly true to his friends. Law-abiding citizens respected him. Criminals hated and feared him. He passed unscathed through dangers as numerous as those recorded in lurid fiction. At any rate, we know the way it went on it. Porter lived with his parents near Palmyra, where Joseph Smith lived part of his life after they'd moved. At any rate, he soon learned about the prophet Joseph Smith and was very attracted to him. They became close friends. They had a lot in common, even though Porter was 8 years younger than the prophet. Enemies called Porter Joseph's lackey. It says, as a boy, Port worked at selling firewood he had cut and wild berries he had picked so that he might contribute the proceeds to the publishing of the Book of Mormon. This is a first edition of the Book of Mormon. So all of you know there were 5,000 copies printed, which is unusual because the big book publishers in New York would typically publish 200 or 300. Here's this little Palmyra publishing outfit ordered to publish 5,000. Now, I've wondered why we only have about 500 of the originals that are still around. Well, over nearly 200 years, a lot of them dissipate. But my theory is that I don't think they waited on that many copies for all those cows or calves that died to make covers for all of them. In fact, some of the saints said they got several signatures of the book off the press and ran and shared it with their friends and neighbors. Well, a book like that's going to fall apart, and so I think that's one of the reasons that maybe we don't have so many copies of it around today. But Porter worked to contribute to that, and he became one of the first members I don't know if he was baptized on April 6th or in June. There's so many discrepancies on this. Maybe you can help us on that.
He was the 9th person to be baptized.
Okay.
In fact, he got baptized before Emma.
Before Emma, yeah. Well, I knew he was the youngest.
Was he the youngest?
First one. Can you hear me? Okay, he was the youngest to be baptized at that time, the early members. And when he died, he was the oldest member of the church in terms of longevity. When he sloughed off at the Colorado Stables, he was by himself. He'd been in the theater that night. He loved the theater, incidentally, Salt Lake Theater. Sometimes he would shoot blanks at the actors and make them perk up a little. He was an actor himself for a time in Nauvoo and then later here in Salt Lake. Porter lived to be an old man through a gunfighting career. Well, we all know the famous story of when he finally escaped and they sentenced him to the 5 minutes in jail. They planned on killing him before he made it back to the main body of the Saints in Nauvoo. And he had to escape. He had several friends that helped him. He rode a buckboard for part of that with one family. Eventually he made it to the Nauvoo house, Joseph's home that was used as a reception area in a hotel. And it was on Christmas Eve. And at any rate, Joseph had 25 couples, all duted to the nines, for the big Christmas party. So they're all dressed up, 50 people. And a ruffian comes to the door. And the men at the door try to wrestle him down. Don't do it before Joseph came and recognized that it was a long-lost friend, Warren Porter Rockwell, escaped from the jail, as Joseph had prophesied that he would, and made it there. And the story goes that he brought Porter in front of the group. Porter had lost weight during that time, but his hair, he gained a lot of hair. And he gave him a blessing right in front of the group, and basically said as long as he never cut his hair, as long as he lived the principles of the gospel, no man would ever be able to take him down. And he died an old man, basically, at the time. He was in the late 60s. And people couldn't believe that Porter had lived a natural life and died, and there was a full inquest at the time of Porter's death. And they found, he just died of old age. I mean, someone with this reputation didn't die of old age in the West. That was very unusual. I went through Wyatt Earp and Associates last month, and we found that a lot of them ended up dead. Wyatt was one of the few that survived till his old years, but that was unusual. Well, it was on May 6, 1842, to backtrack just a little bit, that somebody took a pot shot at the ex-governor, Lilburn W. Boggs, this guy, in Missouri. He was with his young daughter at the time, and there were 4 balls that hit him, 2 in the head, and 1 in the neck, and 1 he swallowed down his throat. They didn't give him much of a chance to survive. Boggs, of course, had issued the extermination order against the Latter-day Saints a few years before this. He was out of office at this time, and immediately the word was spread that the prophet Joseph Smith had prophesied that he would be dead violently, killed violently. And some people quoted him as saying that Porter left town at that time to fulfill prophecy. Joseph always denied that, and so did Porter. Porter is, of course, famous as saying that if he'd shot at him, he wouldn't have missed. There was the Quincy newspaper that Latter-day Saints says, well, we can hope that the governor's dead. And several people had said that he wouldn't survive, but he did. In fact, Boggs later improved to such an extent that he traveled with some of his Missouri buddies to California. And I had several documents signed by him in California. In fact, one of the things that intrigued me and that I collected over the years on these people is this. This is a brand book. Now, those of you who have heard of a brand book, usually they're, a printed book that has the brands for all of the different cattle and horses and so on, livestock. Well, this was the first one, evidently, that was used in Jackson County, Missouri, starting in 1827. So this is before the Latter-day Saints went there. I lucked out getting this thing. In fact, it came out of a Connecticut dealer. I just happened to see it on a catalog, and it was the same day as those children were murdered, 20 of them, back there in Connecticut. I remember calling the dealer and saying how shocked I was to hear that. And this had been on an old catalog. I didn't think they still had it, but I just thought I'd ask. And the dealer said, yeah, they still had it. And I asked if he'd send it out, and he did. But I was so surprised when it came because there are entries as to each mark in here. It's a brand book that went on cattle or went on horses or whatever. And the first 92 entries are Lilburn W. Boggs. And that really shocked me because his signature was rare up till this point. And then some of them are, later on he was relieved of duty by Samuel D. Lucas. You remember that guy? And there's like 300 signatures of Lucas in it. He's the one that ordered Joseph and the others to be taken to the town square and shot, and that Donovan saved. Well, so you never know what you're going to find, and that was kind of a fun find to be able to locate that. I brought a promissory note. It's hard to find anything that Joseph actually signed because he used clerks to sign things for him. But this is actually written out entirely in his handwriting other than the cancellations. It's a promissory note that he wrote out in 1840, so if you wondered what his handwriting really looked like, this is an example of it. And it's Nauvoo, April 13th, 1840. For value received, I promise to pay Stephen Luce $100 on demand, Joseph Smith Jr. His father was still alive at the time he signed it, so he hadn't dropped the junior yet, but that's a rare handwriting. Over the years, I've managed to collect about a dozen items of the prophet that were actually signed by him, but they're difficult to come by. Well, he authorized other people to sign for him. Of course, Porter wasn't one of them because he couldn't write, but Porter was probably one of his dearest friends, and often Joseph paid tribute to Porter Rockwell and to his great defense of him over the years. And Brigham Young did the same later in Utah Territory. I brought well, there's a couple other things I should mention. One is that one of the guys that spread the rumors about Joseph being behind the shooting of Boggs was this guy, John C. Bennett, who signed this document. And the other guy that signed this, William Law, wasn't much of a friend either. Both of them had served high up in the first presidency at one time or another. This is a document they jointly signed that they sent to James Gordon Bennett, the New York Herald publisher, saying, we've approved you for an honorary degree of the University of Nauvoo. And before Bennett left, and of course Law later was involved with the martyrdom. But you might want to look at that. It's kind of an interesting document and sort of rare. It was after the shooting of the prophet, which Joseph had used Porter to, a lot of times, to take messages back and forth with him. Joseph's plan was to head to the west after the expositor affair, and he thought that maybe it would die down after a while, and he went to the little island off in the Mississippi. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Nauvoo. Do you remember that island? Well, not unless you're a swimmer, because the Keokuk Dam raised at 80 feet, the river. So above the island. So the island's there, but it's underneath. And when the press was ordered to be destroyed of the expositor, my great aunt Ordell Ashworth told me that when she was a little girl that her grandfather, Jesse Harmon, great-grandfather, Jesse P., and grandfather Appleton, said if anybody ever comes up with the expositor press, make sure it's awful rusty because me and my father threw it in the river. I don't see that anywhere in church history like so many things, so I'm thinking we ought to dredge the river, see if there's anything left from the Nauvoo Expositor Press, but I latched onto that. In fact, I always loved what old people had to tell me because I figured I could learn something from them. Now that I'm getting old, I'm getting really worried. So, at any rate, but, Porter was taking messages to the island back and forth. He was, without a doubt, the closest friend the prophet had. And Porter felt the same way about Joseph Smith. When Joseph went to Carthage, he specifically did not want Porter going there. He didn't want him to be jailed along with him. He knew he was facing a possible jail sentence. And Joseph, in fact, had told his brother when they got the note that Porter brought over later from him and the others to turn themselves in. Joseph said, well, we can go back, but we'll be murdered. And I don't think Hiram wanted to hear that. Joseph was trying to get Hiram out of the way, but of course Hiram became the second witness on that. And Porter was not there, but when he found out what had happened or what was happening to his dear friend, he rushed as fast as he could those 20 miles. Got there too late. He ran into some people coming out saying that the Mormon prophet had been murdered, had been killed. And he famously said, they murdered the best friend I ever had. He was inconsolable for quite a period of time, as he had such a dear love for the prophet Joseph Smith. He would have laid his life down for him in a heartbeat. I always wondered why he wasn't there, and it was specifically because Joseph didn't want him there. I think Joseph knew his time was up, and he didn't want Porter to have to do that to lose his life in the process or go back to jail. You don't want him going back to jail. At any rate, Missouri law reads that to break a jail, which is the only thing they charged him with after his 9.5 months, one must break a lock, a door, or a wall. Rockwell did not qualify under any of these. The judge in that case ruled that he broke the law by walking out the door, which was open. The jury brought back a verdict of 5 minutes in the county jail. Ironically, by this time, Rockwell had served over 9 months under miserable conditions. Well, that story gets told and told over again and over again. And it's an important part of our heritage, or Latter-day Saint heritage, and it was Porter that played a great part in that. Anyway, just a couple other things that I brought that I think might be of interest to you. I brought there's not a whole lot of Porter stuff around, at least not among collectors. Incidentally, he liked to use a shotgun sometime. This was not his, but it was a Wells Fargo shotgun, and it's marked as such here. I do have early photographs of both, I have a number of Brigham Young, but I only have a couple of Porter Rockwell. So this one, particular one of Rockwell, was a CDV. They were the small photos that came out during the Civil War period. Anyway, it's marked Porter Rockwell, Chief of the Danites or Destroying Angels. So that's how someone marked it on there. There's also a subpoena for Porter and a bunch of others in a case, Utah versus Rufus Ingalls, April of 1855, that's here. And I don't know if I mentioned, I brought a letter of Brigham Young here as well. We'll talk about him more next month. But probably the rarity of all the things I've got here is Porter's X on this document. This is the only original I've ever had in 68 years. I've seen some in books and so on, but this is just signed with his X. Now you say, well, how do you know that? Well, this is a 4-page answer to a criminal complaint against Porter Rockwell for stealing a buckboard and some horses and a mule and 20 gallons of liquor from a man at Camp Floyd, or from the Army area, if you want to say that, in 1862. He wasn't brought to justice, according to this, until October 29, 1875. And he had to sign this answer that he filed. So on this part of the affidavit, being an attorney, I was really impressed by this. I was a prosecutor for years too, so we went after the bad guy. In fact, some of you know that I spent a little time with going after criminals in my life, or them going after me. Anyway, it's notarized this way. Old Porter Rockwell, being duly sworn, says that he has read the foregoing answer. And William Clayton, who notarized him, who knew him well, put a little caret there, heard read the foregoing. It was more accurate. And then Porter put his mark on there, and Clayton notarized it. Well, for a while, of course, out here, he went after a lot of outlaws, and there's a lot of interesting stories of people that he went after. He only cut his hair once, and that was to help the widow of Joseph's brother, who had lost some of her hair, to make a wig for her, so that one didn't count. Kept his hair long, and it was always blessed to survive the various things that happened to him. He had a lot of showdowns. When I was invited to look at the Parley Pratt papers, that was what Chad Fleck wanted me to see, was a showdown he had in downtown Salt Lake City with more than one hombre on a horse. And supposedly, according to Pratt, as I recall, they all pulled a gun on him, and before he even pulled his out, which is, he stared him down a little bit, and they shot at him. And Porter meticulously shot and hit each one of them after that, not being hit himself. Another such occasion took place here on Lehigh Main Street, where sharpshooter Lauren Dibble unloaded both his guns at Rockwell on Lehigh's Main Street in broad daylight without even roughing Rockwell's composure. So there were people here that would outlaws and so on, that would ride in, that would ride right out of Utah because of what they'd heard about Porter Rockwell. They didn't want to tangle with a guy who had a prophecy by a prophet, whether the prophet was true or not. They didn't want to take chances of getting killed by him, and he was that good. It was after the murder of Joseph Smith that the sheriff in Nauvoo, and I know I'm jumping a little back here and forth because that's the way I do it, was asking desperately for his help. The sheriff was a non-Mormon by the name of Jacob Backenstoss, and this is Backenstoss. This is a legal document dealing with William Smith, Joseph's little brother, and Backenstoss had signed it a couple times on the back. And he was being chased by three ruffians, one of which, Frank Worrell, had been involved with the Carthage Greys at the time of the murder of the prophet. This was the group that was supposed to be guarding the prophet, that instead helped for the martyrdom. And at any rate, Rockwell was immediately deputized by the sheriff and said, "Save me, shoot." So Rockwell very steadily shot to death Frank Worrell. And that was one of the things they tried to hold against him. He was in jail for a while on that, but had to be let out because there was no evidence. He was deputized immediately by the sheriff to do that. And then there was the mysterious murder of the Aitken brothers, charged by Brigham Young with the duty to slow down Johnson's army using a nonviolent means as necessary. Rockwell was sent out to stop them. Brigham was a little worried that the army was on the way to Utah, that the Aitken brothers knew too much about how Brigham was going to defend us out here. Afraid the Aitken brothers knew too much about Mormon preparations against Johnson's army, Brigham charged Rockwell to escort four of the brothers back to California. Two of the brothers reappeared in Nephi days later, blood-smeared and tattered. Apparently, their two brothers had been killed somewhere in the desert between Nevada and Utah. The two remaining brothers were later killed as they attempted to return to Salt Lake. Some blamed the deaths on Indians, others condemned Porter Rockwell, but the truth is the murder of the Aitken brothers is still a mystery to this day. And that's another thing. Porter gets his name put in all kinds of killings and things, and I think a lot of it is really unfounded. I have a ward member in our ward who knew I was going to do this little presentation, and he handed me something he'd written up on his great-great-grandfather. And his great-great-grandfather, Hiram Gates, gone to California, had stolen away Porter's oldest daughter, I guess. And there was some question as to whether he was killed by Indians or whether Porter got him on one of his trips out there. I don't know. There's a lot of things that just we don't know. We do know that he shot Brigham Young's nephew after stealing a horse from outside the bishop's house. Lot Huntington, nephew to Brigham Young, fled to Camp Floyd, where he met up with 2 other petty outlaws. An expert tracker, Rockwell, followed the trail all the way to a Pony Express station in Tooele, arriving in the middle of the night. At sunup, the situation quickly escalated into a standoff. The outcome, Lot Huntington tried taking on Porter Rockwell, ended up shot clean through the heart. So that was one guy that died right there. He was a faithful Latter-day Saint, as I mentioned, to his death. Great man. One I'd like to meet someday. I hope I can. He, at his funeral, of course, Joseph F. Smith, and I brought a Joseph F. Smith document here. And I also brought a Pony Express Bible if you've never seen one. There's only about a dozen of them known because Porter helped run the Pony Express station. And there's a letter carried by Pony Express that's on, it looks like it's written on Kleenex, okay? And it was signed back in 1861 from San Francisco. And it ended with, P.S. arrived by Pony Express because there's no time to lose. That was the fastest way across the United States at the time. And Porter was involved with BY Express Company. He was involved with the Pony Express. He was involved with a lot of the building up of the West. Almost everything you can give credit to Brigham Young on, Porter was there, just like he was there with Joseph Smith earlier. But at his funeral, which must have been fairly well attended, and this was after they held an inquiry as to how he died, and found out he died a natural death. Joseph F. Smith was one of the main speakers in the first presidency, and he said that putting it this way, he said, they say, this is Joseph F., they say he was a murderer. If he was the friend of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, and he was faithful to them and to his covenants. And he has gone to heaven, clothed with immortality and eternal life, and crowned with all glory which belongs to a departed saint. Now, the Salt Lake Tribune, never too helpful to the saints, quoted these words of Joseph F. Smith at Porter's funeral. And they said, a fitting tribute from one outlaw to the memory of another. And so the send-off to Porter in the newspaper was a little controversial too. Well, we could talk about a lot of other things. We could share a lot of stories. I tried to use artifacts here to kind of bring parts of Porter alive. It's great when we can find an artifact. Porter, there's not a whole lot around. John mentioned you've got a couple of things, and that's wonderful. Yeah. Do you want to just share what you got at Porter?
Well, I have a door to his cabin at his ranch in Skull Valley. And I also have a couch with a trundle bed.
Wow.
That he placed in a lean-to in an old home in Lehigh because he was tired of interrupting the family late at night when he was passing through and needed to stop and rest.
No.
So he built a lean-to on the back of their house.
No.
And his own lock and key, and that trundle bed was his bed.
That's all right.
And I have that.
That's
and
wonderful.
It's in great condition,
yeah.
too.
Well, that's great. Are there any other artifacts or stories or anything you want to share about Porter? Well, hey, thanks for everybody being here. Appreciate you. Come back next month. We'll do Brigham Young, okay?